it would lead to some 40,000 Israeli citizens, Bedouin citizens, in the Negev being forcibly transferred.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 21 cable stations from Vermont to New York City and on the internet at thestruggle.org. Wide-ranging program today, from Palestine, Israel, to Turkey, to Brazil, and even a bit about Germany. We start with video from Hamden, Connecticut. Rabbi Arik Ascherman spoke at a synagogue there this week. He described his group, Rabbis for Human Rights, which has been working in Israel to defend human rights of Palestinians, the Israeli poor, and asylum seekers from Africa. He himself has put his body on the line numerous times to help Palestinians trying to gather their olive harvest or children being arrested. He described an encounter where he was called upon news that a 13-year-old boy was being used as a human shield, and he tried to intervene unsuccessfully. For his pains, he was choked and tear gassed. He did describe successes of the organization, and he was optimistic that eventually the masses of Israeli Jews would understand. The most urgent campaign of his group right now is on behalf of tens of thousands of Israeli citizens, Bedouin, who will be thrown out of their property if the Israeli government gets its way in legislation being proposed. I interviewed Ascherman about the situation. Rabbi Ascherman, you put out a very urgent and passionate appeal about the situation of the Bedouin. Could you explain what's going on?
Currently, the Israeli government has set legislation to the Knesset, which would, if passed, lead to the demolition of tens of so-called unrecognized villages which existed before the State of Israel, or in places where the Israeli army moved them when Israeli Arabs were still under a military government. It would lead to some 40,000 Israeli citizens, Bedouin citizens, in the Negev being forcibly transferred from their communities to these artificially created townships, which have become magnets for drugs and crime and poverty and despair. Most of their land they would be dispossessed of most of their land. And we think that this is, in the 18 years that I've been working for Rabbis for Human Rights, this would be the most serious potential moral tragedy that I've had to deal with. The idea that 40,000 people, I can't get my head around that number, and we're talking about such a moral tragedy.
Why do they want to do this? Do they not live productive lives where they
There are different excuses that it's better for the Bedouin, that we'll be able to provide services, which isn't true because there's many Jewish communities which receive services which are smaller and more spread out. It's basically wanting land for the Jewish people. And so we believe that this is not what the Jewish people is about. A poll we recently did shows that most Israelis have a way overblown idea of how much land the Bedouin want. They think the Bedouin are going to take over the Negev, and when we tell them it's only 5.4% of the Negev for over 30% of the population, most Israelis say that seems fair to them. And so we believe, still having very deep faith in our fellow Israelis and the goodness and decency of our fellow Israelis, that if we succeed in holding up a mirror so people understand what we're about to do in the light of day by Knesset decree, we don't think that this is what Israelis really would support.
Now, in your talk, you mentioned that you had produced a video with the noted singer and actor Theodore Bickel, right, who made an appeal on the part of Bedouin, right, and that had an effect on one of the leaders of this legislation, yes, Benny Begin.
If people want to Google Facebook, Bickel, Bedouin, you will find this. We're asking everybody to watch it and distribute it as widely as possible. We're asking people to, on our website or Facebook, you can get the link to a black flag with the number 40,000 on that. We're asking people to use it as their Facebook profile picture. And we are asking people to sign some of the petitions which we and Trua and others have for people. You can find it also, again, if you Google change.org Bedouin, you'll get to our petitions. And we think that we all must be putting pressure on the government. We've already had the reform movement in this country and the Reconstructionist movement in this country and the renewal movement speaking out about this. We've had 65 rabbis, Orthodox through Reform, in Great Britain, delivering a letter to the Israeli ambassador, and all this is having an effect. Today there was a discussion of this in the Knesset, and Benny Begin, the minister without portfolio in the previous government, who is shepherding this through, spoke about how personally angry he was at Rabbis for Human Rights and at myself personally because of this video. He was stung by it. He maintains that it'll be way less than 40,000 people, a minuscule number of people. Let him prove it. If he can show us his numbers and that our numbers are wrong, we'd be more than happy to pull the video. And but he also said clearly, although he denies that so many people are going to be evicted, he said very clearly that the Bedouin are going to have to give up their claims to their lands. That's also unacceptable. So I don't like having people upset with me. I hope that he will meet with us and that we can come to some understanding, but understanding has to be one based on justice for all human beings created in God's image. That includes Jews, that includes Bedouin.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Go to our website, thestruggle.org, to see a video prepared for Rabbis for Human Rights that features the legendary singer-actor Theodore Bickel, perhaps most famous for his role as Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. Bickel compares what might happen to the Bedouin to what did happen to the Jews of the Pale of Settlement in Imperial Russia that was depicted so amazingly in that famous play. This incredible photo shows a huge cloud of tear gas being used against people in Turkey. Tens of thousands have been demonstrating in the streets for 3 weeks against policies of their government, only to be met by barrages of tear gas, arrests, and claims by their prime minister that they're all bandits who will be investigated one by one. Groups ranging from Amnesty International to the National AFL-CIO Labor Federation have condemned Turkish government action. On June 18th, we covered a spirited protest of about 150 people in Liberty Park in Manhattan. This is the same park where Occupy Wall Street began and was suppressed. We begin with people singing new words to an old song. Those were the days. I interviewed a woman who would not give out her name or let herself be photographed out of fear of retaliation for family back in Turkey. What's going on in Turkey?
Kids are being beaten up. That's how it started. And then people started joining. Government workers, lawyers, doctors, anyone and everyone. All the communities started joining in protests of the government taking over the one green area left in Istanbul. Much like your your park here in New York. Imagine if someone were to come in, gas the people that were peacefully camping out in Central Park, burn their tents down, and just use insufferable, horrible measure against unarmed civilians. That's how it started. Now it's becoming a community movement against the oppression of the Turkish AKP government. And I'm really glad people are actually speaking up against it. At their own cost, though. 25 people have been arrested in Turkey in the second day of the protests just for using social media. The doctors who are helping out the wounded in the parks and everywhere else, the government started investigating them. 30 attorneys got arrested, and that's only the beginning. 70 more got arrested in total just after they started protesting the ruthless they dragged these attorneys out of the courthouse without an arrest warrant, mind you. 30 of them went that way. The other 70 got arrested when they were protesting. Now they're looking, the journalists are already in prison. The military is already in prison. Anyone who dares to speak up against this man is in prison. There's absolutely no freedom of speech. This is how Hitler came into power. This is exactly how it started. First, he started scare tactics. And then, when he arrested government officials, he started replacing them with his own men, who don't know what's going on in the country, who don't care what's going on in the country. They only have their own agenda in mind, which is money. They don't care how they get it. They don't care if it's at the cost of the students, at the civilians, at the cost of their mothers. They don't care.
Now, I understood that there was some promise that they wouldn't take the park because of a court decision.
Yep. Well, that goes to show you how truthful the Prime Minister Erdogan is being to his people. First, he announced that 17 people died in the protests in New York City 2 weeks ago. I was here. It was peaceful. Police were helping us. Second, I'm not even going to go through the whole list because that's a 2-hour show. But the park is not supposed to be touched. It was a judicial order that said it's not to be touched. And yet, we just got news that the police are, again, going into Gezi Park to take care of the protesters in their own way, which is gassing them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the middle of the rally, news was announced that police were advancing against protesters in Gezi Park.
The police is on their way to going back into Taksim, despite what the Prime Minister has said. He promised that he will not touch until the matter has been taken to court. Despite this, the police are ready to attack Taksim. Türkçe söylüyorum. Taksim'e yeniden polis basmakta. Dün Recep Tayyip Erdoğan söz verdi ki hiç kimseye, hiçbir polis dokunmayacaktır ve buna rağmen yine polis basmaya hazırlanıyor.
Justin, I understand you were in Turkey just a week ago.
That's right.
And tell us some of the things you saw.
I spent a week in Istanbul, and I went there after I heard about the police crackdown at Gezi Park on the peaceful protesters. I went to document and tell the story of what was happening in this beautiful park that had been occupied by environmental activists and others to protect it from being turned into a shopping mall development. And the police had very brutally cracked down on the protesters with water cannons, with tear gas, and really beaten people pretty bad. And as a response, people came out in solidarity and support, and the protest grew very quickly. And by the time I had arrived, the police had retreated, and the whole square around Gezi Park was filled with tens of thousands of people showing support for the initial tree sit-in and also for a larger referendum against the overarching policies of the Erdogan administration in Turkey.
How long were you there?
I was there for 1 week.
And were there any police attacks during the time you were there?
No, the police had backed out of this part of Istanbul, and they were attacking protesters in other parts of the city and in other cities all across Turkey as the protests spread. But I myself didn't experience them in Istanbul proper. Although right nearby in another area at Beşiktaş, there were skirmishes, and I did get pepper sprayed at one point.
I understand that pepper spray is made in the good old USA.
Yes, that's right. And actually, I should say tear gas canisters, not pepper spray. It came from Homer, Pennsylvania. And people took those canisters and actually turned them into art projects, made vases out of them, someone made an air freshener out of them. So, I think people are taking the violence of the police and really turning it into energy to propel the protest forward and really demand dignity and justice from the government. And they really feel that it doesn't represent them, that the administration is encroaching more and more on their liberties and their individual and collective freedoms, and that is a cause for concern amongst many, many young and old Turks of all ages.
Now, he was just elected. Were there any counter-protests? Were there supporters for him?
Well, he left the country actually towards the beginning of the protest, and when he came back, he actually kind of chartered a whole bunch of public buses to come take people to the airport to cheer him on, Prime Minister Erdogan. But overall, there have not been very large counter-protests. I think that, for the most part, the opponents of the protests want to frame them as anti-religious, as anti-democratic, as terroristic, and they're very far from that. This is a group of people, a growing group of people that just does not want to see this descend into violence. They don't want to see a civil war in the country. They want to see a modern, secular, thriving, unified Turkey. And I don't believe that that's an unreasonable demand, and I don't think that saving one of the last green spaces in Istanbul is an unreasonable demand. They've had some success, and I think that they'll continue to have it.
Let me ask you about another question. What about the war in Syria? I heard some people say that was a reason people are upset with him, that he got Turkey involved in that war. In the discussions you had, did that come up?
No, I don't think anybody was talking about Syria in the parks. Obviously the conflict in Syria is affecting Turkey, a neighbor of Syria. There's many refugees that have come into the Syrian side of Turkey, but the protests for the most part have been focused on the other side of Turkey. And while there's definitely some interconnections and effects of overlapping effects, I don't think that the protests are directly related to the Syrian conflict.
Now, you've been back a while. I assume you still have contacts with people over there. Have you heard any things that we should talk about?
I've stayed in contact with many of the organizers and activists in Gezi Park. Unfortunately, as we speak, there's another police crackdown happening. So, it's just, we just have to continue to watch what's happening, demand that the media, the foreign and the domestic media in Turkey, give fair coverage to the protests, and really, demand that people stand up for their freedom, and that the Prime Minister show restraint and really respect the rights of these people. They're Turks just like any other, and they deserve from their Prime Minister fair treatment, and they deserve to have their voices heard and to be able to protest peacefully and demand better for themselves and their communities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A Greek supporter of the Turkish demonstrators filled us in about an occupation of a Greek TV station by its employees.
First of all, we have been here last week. Last week we had been here in support of the people of Turkey rising against their increasingly repressive government. This week we are here again in solidarity, of course, with the people of Turkey who continue their struggle. As of last week, as far as I know, it was more than 70 cities all around Turkey. And of course, we are here in solidarity with the staff of the public broadcast, public TV, ERT.
I understand they just pulled the plug on them?
Yes, they did, with a very authoritarian, dictatorial manner, unprecedented really under any, what one would call a democratic government, simply with a ministerial order signed by two ministers, or the minister and the prime minister anyway, and the staff, the employees of Greek radio and public Greek radio and television, about 2,700 of them, were ordered within 6 hours to leave their jobs. They were fired within 6 hours. This is unprecedented. Normally this should have gone through the parliament, there should have been a discussion. This has never happened before. Even during the period of the dictatorship back in the 70s, this had never taken place.
So what has been the response?
Suddenly what happened, like TV went live. The program was just stopped. They had sent riot police up in the mountain of Parnitha and other places where the antennas were located to shut the signals down.
So what have people done in reaction?
The reaction had been immediate. Thousands of people gathered, first of all, outside the headquarters of ERT, which is located not very far from the center of Athens. And very soon after that, in various squares and in various places all around Greece where ERT is located, there were gatherings. And also many different sites offered to broadcast, to live stream the program of the ERT, of the Greek television, which continued without any interruption and continues without any interruption as we speak. So the employees of ERT basically are occupying the building, and they broadcast. They are giving, as far as people say, some of their more interesting programming, really released by any obligations or pressure by the Greek government. And people are in support. People are very much in support of their efforts. So
there's been demonstrations outside the building?
Yes, there have been people gather. I don't know exactly what is the situation right now or how many people are out there. And also Syriza, the coalition left, the party in the opposition, and their leader, Alexis Tsipras, has called for a public meeting, public protest at the Syntagma Square right outside the parliament, I believe for Monday.
It's definite. Medea Benjamin is coming to Connecticut Saturday, July 13th and the 14th to have 2 free talks right after her fact-finding trip to Yemen to speak to families affected by U.S. drone strikes and to relatives of people in the U.S. dungeons in Guantanamo. See our website, thestruggle.org, for details.
Let's get the latest from Al Jazeera's Gabriel Elizondo, who's in Sao Paulo for us, where earlier protesters blocked major highways and streets. So, Gabe, they're going to reduce the fare hike in Sao Paulo and Rio, but is it going to ease the tensions? Is this enough for the protesters?
Well, that's a really million-dollar question that everyone's asking right now, and the simple answer is we simply don't know yet. What we're sensing from the protesters, and it's a very diverse group when we say protesters, is they're deciding themselves what to do right now. Do they consider this a victory and sort of stand down for a while, or are they going to take up another cause, such as health, education, some of these other issues, high cost of the stadiums for the World Cup? These are all things that were kind of bubbling under the surface that they were really protesting about, as well as the transport tariffs. And so now there's a real sense of they don't know what to do. They're trying to figure that out right now. We do know there's going to be big marches tomorrow, and there's figuring out, will it be a celebratory march, or will it be more of the marches calling for change? That's what we're trying to figure out and see in the coming hours and days.
Indeed. And tell us about what's been happening today, Gabe. Is the situation as tense as it was yesterday, Tuesday?
Well, clearly with this announcement in the last couple hours about reversing the tariffs in Rio and Sao Paulo, the mood is a little calmer here in Rio. I'd say it's a lot calmer here in Sao Paulo, I'm sorry. There are some protesters out on the streets, but they're nowhere near what they were yesterday or even the day before. We are seeing some protests in Rio de Janeiro, also in Brasilia, but there's sort of a mixed mood, I would say, between celebration, but also some protesters saying this isn't enough, we want more of our concerns addressed. So it's an interesting moment. This protest is not a top-down protest movement. This is very linear, made up of a lot of different groups, a lot of different opinions, and so they're going to have to kind of sort this out in the coming days to see if this really moves forward as a unified protest or if it breaks up.
Gabe, thank you very much for that update. That's Algiers' Gabriel.
Finally, this photo of a demonstration in Germany on the day before an official visit to that country by President Barack Obama. 800 people protested. This banner is translated, "Against war, repression, and racism." At the climax of this Berlin demonstration, the protesters made a human chain encircling the U.S. Embassy, which is next to the Brandenburg Gate, where Obama was to speak the next day. It all had to take place the day before his visit because of policies being adopted all over the world, sheltering big shots from ever having to view any sign of dissent. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.